wiped out. I mean, they got killed more than anybody else. What right do they have to run for leadership?
I don't think much at all. Listen, Nancy Pelosi is the best that they're going to get. She turned a do-nothing Congress into a do-something Congress. She passed something like 300 pieces of legislation through the House that never even made it to the Senate. I mean, she is a workhorse, and she kept what was an incredibly diverse coalition of Democrats together on a variety of legislation. So she does a good job, and she's going to keep on doing it.
Tim, you agree on what a wonderful job Nancy Pelosi's been doing?
I agree it was an incredibly diverse coalition, or a diverse coalition of Democrats, and I agree that a lot of the conservatives got wiped out, and that Nancy Pelosi, a San Francisco liberal, fits what this party is becoming, which is the flip side of what they accuse the Republicans of being, a regional party concentrated on the coast and in big cities. Now, nobody would say they should pick a blue dog. Again, there's almost none of them left. Half of them got wiped out. But at least if they went with a liberal from a different part of America, it might send a better signal that they aren't just a San Francisco
Wait a minute
party.
now. You know, you guys do this all the time with the San Francisco stuff.
Yeah, not about San Francisco.
From what I understand, San Francisco is in the United States of America, right? Shouldn't you have a little respect for that?
I'm from Greenwich Village, New York. I know what it's like to be from parts of the country that don't represent a lot of the rest of the country. And the fact of the matter is, yes, the Democrats do have...
So you also agree Texas doesn't represent the rest of the country, right? I mean, those kooky conservatives in Texas, we should just ignore them, right?
When the Republicans had the president and the whip and a majority leader and lots of chairmen being from Texas, that was a problem. When the Republicans were all concentrated in the South, that was a problem. I mean, I'm just saying, Nancy Pelosi it did bring together a diverse Democratic Party.
So she did her job, and she did it well. And what you're saying is that somehow, because she is unpopular with your Republican base, that somehow makes her not good for Democrats. I just don't see the corollary there. Let's have a great chair of the DCCC. They can recruit as many candidates as they want. They can run their races. And Nancy Pelosi can stay focused on what's really important to the American people, which is getting the economy back on track and getting everybody who needs a job into one.
All right, listen, my final word on this is that with the wild swings going on in Congress, who knows, she might be Speaker of the House again in 2 years.
I agree.
You know, so we'll find out. Now, look, after Tuesday's shellacking, humble Democrats are doing some soul searching. So while Republicans insist the losses indicate a rejection of Democratic policies, the president says it's a communication problem.
Over the course of 2 years, we were so busy and so focused on getting a bunch of stuff done that we stopped paying attention to the fact that leadership isn't just legislation, that it's a matter of persuading people. I think that we haven't been successful at that, and I take personal responsibility for that.
By that, I hope he means he'll actually fight back against Republican attacks this time around. That's part of communication, you know, but I'm not really holding my breath. So, Tim, is the president's is it his policies or his sales pitch that's the problem?
President Obama is a guy who gets asked in the college interview, what's your greatest weakness? And he says, I'd have to say I don't communicate to the whole country how great a job I'm doing. That's what he's doing. It's bogus. I mean, yeah, he does get blamed for things that aren't his fault. It's not his fault that unemployment's at 10%. I'm not going to say that, and that does get pinned on him. Fine, I'll be fair. But the fact that he's not willing to say some of the policies I did were mistakes, or some of the way I went about my job was a mistake, and he simply says, I didn't adequately communicate, that's the oldest excuse in politics.
They're not mutually exclusive. Listen, some of his policies weren't successful. I will say that the stimulus should have been a lot larger than it was. But they also definitely have a messaging challenge when they've passed the largest middle-class tax cut in history, and nobody seems to know about it. There are even people complaining that their taxes have risen, which is just patently untrue. That means that you have a communication gap between the White House and the American people.
All right, Tim, first of all, I have to congratulate you on my favorite part of the show so far, when you said, I'll be fair, which is very merciful of you. Okay, so let me ask you to continue that. You know, the president certainly tried a lot, right? And he said, look, I'm going to do health care reform, and he did it. Now, you might not like it, but he did it, and I don't particularly love it. Financial reform, ditto, etc. There was a lot that he got done. Isn't that what he's supposed to do?
No, I mean, and this is a problem historians fall into when they rank the great presidents. They're always the guys who did a lot. Maybe the president's job isn't necessarily to do a lot. What did he have to do? And I'll speak your language here, Jane. What did he have to do to pass health care reform? He had to sit down with Billy Tozan and say, Billy, what does the drug industry want? He got the hospital lobbies on board, he got the doctor lobbies on board, and he asked these biggest lobbies. The drug industry is the biggest lobby in the country. He says, what do you want? Let them write a bill. It's driving up premiums for people.
So
it's
Tim,
driving
if you
up
don't
healthcare
judge it by what they do, then what do you judge a presidency
it not by how. I'm saying that you don't judge it by how much they do. You judge it by the quality of what they do. And I think that health care bill is a lemon, and it's going to hurt Americans.
Now, Alicia,
and a lot of Americans agree.
Alicia, Tim has a point because he did make those deals, right?
Yeah.
He did make those deals with the drug companies, etc. And in fact, when they ask Americans why don't you like health care reform, for those who don't, by over 2-to-1 margin, they say it's because it didn't do enough.
Right.
So is that really the biggest problem that Obama had? He didn't go for it enough?
I mean, I think when we go back to this idea of the Democratic coalition that he needed to vote on this in order to pass it through the House and the Senate, I think he was in many ways limited by that. I mean, do you remember that night when it looked like this whole thing was going to fall apart because Bart Stupak didn't want there to be abortion language in this, and yet somehow through Nancy Pelosi and Barack Obama's leadership, they managed to hold their coalition together. Yes, these pieces of legislation are imperfect. There's definitely time to tweak them later, but you cannot deny that they are huge successes and huge steps forward.
Yeah, actually, so can I. So we have agreement there. So now let's go on to the third topic. Finally, what does bipartisanship really mean? Today, President Obama unfortunately sounded sincere about his desire to work across the party lines and get the economy growing again.
We can't spend the next 2 years mired in gridlock. If we can work together, then this country will not only recover, but it will prosper.
All right, that sounds lovely, but the reality is that bipartisanship is a trick. The Republicans never play along. A conservative strategist once told me that it's something that they just use to beat up Democrats so that they'll go along with Republican proposals. As if to prove that point, this is what Republican leadership said about what they consider to be bipartisanship.
The White House has a choice. They can change course, or they can double down. If the administration wants cooperation, it will have to begin to move in our direction.
The media and the Democrats have to stop falling for this trick. But I think Democrats might be falling for it on purpose. Alicia, let me ask you a question. They had 60 votes in the Senate, and they still watered down the bills for bipartisanship. Is it possible that they're doing that just to appease the same corporate interests that are funding their campaigns as well?
I'm not sure that this has to do with corporate interests so much as it is about holding their coalition together. And, Cenk, I think there's also sort of a more meta question here about what it even means to be bipartisan, because I don't think we have a working definition of what that is. Does that mean Dems get 50%, Republicans get 50%? Does that mean they exchange one idea for another? Let's get an actual working criteria for what we're going to define as bipartisanship so that you in the media can say, yes, they did it, or no, they didn't, because right now it's just a he said, she said scenario.
All right. By the way, to keep their coalition together is a code word for conservative Democrats who get a lot of money from corporations and from rich people that are beholden to them, selling them out. Yeah, selling out the American people.
How about conservative Democrats who also represent regional interests? We have to admit that
what
if you're
regional
coming
interests?
out of,
The regional interests not to have health care insurance?
If you come out of West Virginia, you have to admit that the coal industry represents, and every hard-working West Virginian who works in that coal industry is a part of your constituency.
Right, but they also don't want to die
that.
in a coal mine because some Democrat or Republican sold out and let them get away with murder in terms of safety regulations.
And
I got to go to Tim.
Yes, I agree.
Max Baucus's regional interest.
Hold on, Tim. I got to ask you a question.
Is K Street. I'll tell you that.
All right, Tim. I got to ask you a question. Look, the Republicans say bipartisanship when they're in the minority. For the last 2 years, they were crying, oh, bipartisanship. Now all of a sudden they're in charge. Gone. Bipartisanship is gone. They don't need it anymore.
Well, no, you were just quoting Mitch McConnell, who is the minority leader of the Senate. So they're not in charge now. Yeah. Okay. Again, I'm going to agree with you because you're pretty far to the left. I'm pretty far to the right. We often meet under the boat, as they say.
You two should hold hands.
We can hold hands when we get pushed off our respective edges. Bipartisanship is basically a BS line, and the Democrats attack Republicans for not being bipartisan. And when Obama does that, he's attacking Republicans Republicans for not going along with everything he says. And when Republicans attack Democrats for not being bipartisan, yeah, it's a trick just as much as it is when Obama says it. It's a silly word. For the media, it's some sort of god. Oh, well, this is a great bipartisan measure. And they really love the guys in the middle, the Ben Nelsons and the
bipartisan measures. I mean, you look at something like McCain-Kennedy, the immigration bill from 2006, that was old school legislating where each side conceded pieces they want and then they got a workable piece of legislation. You can't tell